Good morning, everyone. My name is Adrian Redman, and I'm from the Department of Social Services from Canberra, coming from Ngunnawal country. It is a pleasure to be here in Wurundjeri country today, and a big thank you to Uncle Bill for his welcome this morning. I was going to give everyone a couple of minutes to come in still, but I think this is us today, because accessible documents, it really isn't the sexy subject, is it? But look, it is something that we've put a lot of time into over the last year. At the Department of Social Services last year, we redeveloped our website, and one of the big focuses that we did have there was to make sure that we had an equal opportunity, an equal experience for everyone who was coming to our website and needing to access our information. And this presentation will be a way of presenting back a lot of the more interesting stuff that we did manage to find as we were going through that process. So, I'm going to start with a bit of a contradictory statement for someone that's about to tell you all about documents and how to make them good. And that's to say that documents are just awful. They're inconsistent. Assistive technology behaves differently depending on which kind of document it is, or how old it is, or what version it is. They're time-consuming to create, and if you are being as inclusive as possible, you're creating a lot of different variants of just one document just to make sure that you've covered all bases. No matter which way you look at the scenarios I'll be looking over today, downloadable documents are not the best way to do things online. But they can be convenient. They are often the most usable way to make your information available, and they're often made using tools familiar to everyone in your organisation, so your publishing team can get a bit of help to get that information done and out there. And they also provide a really neat way to be able to get specific information to specific audiences. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to go on a quick journey through the problems with accessible documents and the current state of accessibility as we see it as part of the work that we were doing last year. I'll take you through some of the thinking that went on into the dss.gov.au project that we completed and go through some of the findings of that work that we thought would be fascinating. We'll take a look at creating some accessible and inclusive documents with some examples for those of you that haven't seen some of the tools and techniques before. And we'll finish with a vision, if we get time, of how creating accessible documents might look in the near future with a bit more support, love and attention and experimenting from people like all of us. So to start with, let's have a quick look at the evolution of accessibility as we've come to understand it working through all of this. So for the last decade or two, the focus of accessibility has been on technical compliance. How can we create websites and documents in a way that can be reliably read and understood by the machines so that they can communicate with us? And what I mean there is, especially for those of us that rely on assistive technology or screen readers or things like that, we needed to teach it how to understand that content so that it could read back to us. And we got pretty good at that. Especially in the federal government where I work, the National Transition Strategy made sure that we all knew about WCAG 2.0 AA. And all of that has evolved as technology has matured. So as technology's got better, we've got better at making accessibility stuff, and we've really moved from let's just make sure that the robots can understand what we're talking about here to a new way of thinking about accessibility. So our browsers, our systems and our devices, they're all a lot smarter and can figure out what we meant when we take some shortcuts to a degree. They can generate accessible features like captions for videos without us needing to do anything extra. We're also much better at creating websites and applications using semantic markup. WCAG and its requirements are very familiar to most of us and hopefully second nature to all of you. Technical accessibility is still important, but the evolution that we've seen is that it's just not enough anymore. There's so much more. It's almost lazy to stop at that point of functionally accessible. Technology has pushed us along, and now we need to test and validate that something is accessible and usable. And, the machines are pretty darn good at understanding what we're trying to tell now, but can the humans understand what we're trying to communicate? And there's a number of documents and policies that are out there at the moment pushing for the adoption of accessible and usable systems and websites. And a big old list here of a handful that we were using as reference material for our work. But across all of them, there is this common theme that requiring compliance with the highest possible levels of WCAG is potentially less important than testing with real users and understanding their needs and how they're actually using your systems. And as an example of that, as part of our testing that we did for the DSS project, we did some testing with people with disability. And this is a short clip from that work. Now, I'll just sort of set the scene before I hit the play button here. But Jamal here is a blind tester from an organisation called See Me Please, who I'd recommend you do note down and go and have a look at if you get a chance. Now, he relies on a screen reader, and what we were fascinated to see here is he's reading through the document, and he's down to the sort of grey section with the image down the bottom of the page. And what we were fascinated to see is his reaction to how we had implemented the requirement to have links out of context still make sense.
Heading level 3 link and your safe on age-appropriate accommodation for people with disability. Share your experiences with finding age-appropriate accommodation and support for yourself, your family member or someone you care for. Link continue relink and your safe on age-appropriate accommodation for people with disability.
Alright, and then there's a link to read the article. But then in the, like, it says link continue reading, and then it reads the headline of the article, like, in the link. It's unnecessary, that would just be the link, just say link continue reading.
The 20. Heading level 3 link and your safe on.
Which we thought was really quite fascinating, because there's a WCAG 2 AAA requirement for link purpose with link only that says the link must include enough information that you understand what it's going to take you to. But he's just there telling us, as someone that this rule was set up to help, that that's actually not that helpful. So that blew our little minds. My team and I sat down for a very long time trying to figure out what that actually meant. Like, does that mean WCAG is actually not what we should be aiming for? And yeah, it was a fascinating and wonderful example of how technically accessible is almost competing with functionally usable quite often. Quickly zipping through a few of these other places that are just really pushing the idea that nobody should be left behind and user-focused systems are it. The digital experience policy, which includes a whole bunch of things like the digital service standard and the digital inclusion standard, very much have a focus on the user experience over that technical side of things. And WCAG 3 is also heading in that kind of a direction. It's now moving to a sliding scale of how accessible is it, not so much is it accessible or not. And I think that's a really healthy place to get to, but it is also going to make a lot of us rather uncomfortable when our ability to put a big red rubber stamp on our product and say, yep, that's accessible, is down to the opinions of people that we've tested with. So it'll be a fascinating space for us to watch. But where it does land us is when we're considering the accessibility of documents. At one end of the spectrum, we have the bare minimum. How little can we do to not get sued? So if you've provided an HTML version of your document, then you're probably okay, as long as that met WCAG, because that is the baseline. That is the minimum expectation of all of us. But if you provided a downloadable version instead, like a PDF or a Word document, you're going to need to be certain that it's 100% accessible. Falling below this point is a very dangerous place to be, and I'd argue that if this is where you are, a lot of people out there are still going to struggle to understand and find and access your information. So at the other end of the scale, we have the ethically perfect option that is a version for everyone that's tailored to their every need. And the speakers already this morning have started getting us all thinking along this way of how do we design something for everyone but without having to do it for everyone. And you extrapolate this all out and it all gets very, very complex. So, you know, if we run this hypothetical scenario out, we're probably going to start with a Word document because that's what all of our documents start out as. So we have ourselves a Word document. And then because Word doesn't really have any standards to comply to, we'll create a PDF because it does have standards, and we'll get into a bit more detail about what those are later. So we've now got a Word document and a PDF, but we need versions for our international users and people who don't speak English. So we'll bolt another 20 versions on top of that. A few extras for the Australian languages that we have out there that we also want to be able to support. The HTML version might as well come now because we've done everything else. That gives us the ability to have our large text, high contrast, and our dark mode covered off. So all of those users are now sorted. We'll create an easy read version because we've been told that's a great idea. And we'll get an Auslan version for people who English is still a second language, even though they're native English speakers, because they talk using Auslan instead. Then a whole bunch of other little bespoke options that we drop in there as well. And you can see this is really freaking complex to do. So the biggest problem is if you did get to the end of this process with your document, chances are some guy in a suit is going to turn around and say chapter 2's all wrong. And then you're redoing the lot. Miserable time to be had. So kind of like Goldilocks trying to find the ideal porridge temperature. Our objective is to find the right balance between that ethically perfect but prohibitively expensive and difficult, and falling short on expectations that the public will have for our websites. So we're just going to try and find that middle ground there somewhere. And working on the dss.gov.au project, we feel we got to a pretty safe place. And that's what we're going to have a look at now. So the last DSS website was 10 years old. It was in desperate need of love and attention. Many just wanted to take it out the back end, bop it on the head, and that's exactly what we did. We built a brand new one, and with that came the opportunity for us to really steer everything about how this website was going to come together. Usability was a focus for all of our users. We had called people with disability, low literacy users, low bandwidth users, people with temporary disabilities. These were all in scope. And we know that as the Department of Social Services, we're also an agency that has a lot of potential to be seen as a leader in this space. And so we felt it was a responsibility of ours to try and make sure that we got this one right. Everything that we were learning and researching, though, was just pointing to the reality that we did need to test with real users. And if we weren't going to get those real users in, we were definitely going to fall short. Now, with that research, we did determine that documents are still necessary, but they're necessary from a usability perspective. So while going HTML for everything is a very logical conclusion, and it does solve a lot of problems, it's just not practical. So there's many usability considerations that meant that documents still made a lot of sense. Whether we needed to provide a document to somebody else for them to print it out and hand it out, share it with someone that they're caring for, or handing it out at interviews or wherever it may be, being able to print it is still very valuable, especially if the look and feel of these documents is important. And I challenge you to find any graphic designer out there that will tell you that the look and feel isn't a large piece of the communication capacity of a particular document. We all like shiny things, and we do stay clear and distrust ugly or confusing things. And I don't know how many of you have printed out a website and tried to tell someone this is totally legit, you should trust this. That's not going to happen. So as exciting as it could be, these documents still need to exist. And then the next question that we asked was, all right, so if we've got these users and they're coming in and, for example, they don't speak English, English is a second language, how do they actually find the documents that we've created for them that are not in English? And we looked at all of our websites, we looked at everyone else's websites, and we noticed that we've probably been doing this one wrong. Now, a lot of us, including ourselves, simply created a page, called it Translated Resources, and dropped all of the documents in there. But the user workflow of how do you get to that point doesn't make any sense. We've got somebody who's coming into the website, they've probably used their browser and the smarts that it now brings to translate that website and allow them to navigate through the narrative that you've spent a lot of time building. It's working through that IA. And they're going to get to that document, and they're going to click to download the document, and it's going to be in English, because the version that you created specifically for them is hidden away on a page somewhere else. It's not the workflow that they wanted. So we very quickly went, okay, no matter what, if we have a document, we need to collect together all of the different versions of that document and make sure that they're available in the one place. An equal experience regardless of what version they might need. And so to do that, we came up with this idea of document variants and collecting them all together in one place. Now I'm going to try something that is potentially a little bit dangerous. I'm going to try and Alt-tab to a browser so I can show you how this ended up. Let's see if this works. That didn't. That didn't. That sort of did. All right. So here we go. This is an example of how a document appears in the DSS website. So this is a link to a document. Now, in this link, what we've got is a couple of clues to tell someone what they're going to be getting once they click through. We've got the title, we've got the description, and we've got a few little hints here that we've got an easy read version, and we've also got international languages. Now, if we try a different one, and we have a scroll down here, this particular document is going to come in easy read and an Auslan variant. So we can access the resource. And one of the things that came back in a lot of our feedback was that having everything in one place like this ticked a lot of boxes for a lot of our users. So you come through here, we've got our traditional formats that would cover a lot of our users. And then as you work your way down, you very quickly get to the alternative versions or the alternative variants that we have for the easy read version or an Auslan version, both of which are equivalent or try and convey equivalent information of that main document. So now I'm going to try and get back to my presentation, and let's see if that works. Hey. All right, so now I can skip past all the slides that I had there that were just in case that didn't work. And just a quick plug there for See Me Please, who did help us validate that that approach worked, and the users really appreciated having everything there. So they're a fantastic little business, and as I say, highly recommend you reach out and have a chat to them if you wanted to be able to test with people with disability. All right. Which moves us on to now we've got this model. We've got a way to present the documents. We've tested that. If people make their way to those pages, they're going to be able to find a version that is made for them. How do we actually now create accessible documents? So, this has been covered a couple of times already today, so I'll zip through it. But for those of you that haven't seen a lot of these figures before, this is pretty telling on how we simply need to rethink how we're creating documents rather than just what formats are we doing it. The good news here is it's probably not our job. It's our job to tell everyone who's creating those documents to do better. We can facilitate putting those documents up online once they've got them in the right place. The table of who can read at what levels across Australia, it ends up being pretty scary when you have a look at this and say, so if I'm writing at a high school equivalent, so I'm writing, you know, at this year 11 and 12 level, there's 44% of everyone who is going to have a hard time reading and understanding that information. So as an example, just to play this out, here we have a postgraduate reading level of an item from a menu. Handcrafted heritage Angus medallion on artisanal brioche, with aged cheddar infusion accompanied by heirloom potato battens twice cooked in cold pressed oil. However, that reading level and the complexity of that whole sentence means that we've only got the postgrad reading level people being able to read that and comprehend that like that. That's 1.2% of everybody in Australia who is going to be able to go, yeah, totally know exactly what you're talking about. So let's simplify that sentence down a little bit. Let's just make it a Year 9 reading level. So now we're hitting around about 56% of everybody. A handmade Angus beef patty with a soft brioche bun with melted aged cheddar served with crispy twice cooked fries. Much easier to understand, much clearer, and people are going to be working away with that. We can go a step further though, and we can go down to our Year 3 reading level. We've got a picture to help us understand what it is. So even if you can't read the English, you can see exactly what that is. We've got a picture, hamburger and cheese and a side of chips. 96% of everyone now completely understand what you're trying to say. Makes so much more sense, makes a significant difference if we're trying to make documents that are inclusive, that everyone can understand. All right, moving on to the document formats themselves. For DSS, and I'm sure many other agencies out there, Word is where a lot of these documents start their life. So for us, it was always going to be part of the equation. How can we make sure that these Word documents are good? Now, a simple Word document, these are the tips that you want to pass on to your content developers and anyone in your business areas who are creating stuff that intends to be put online. But once they've done that, you've got a good structure of the document. Word has a bunch of accessibility tools to help you make sure that you've actually got the accessibility stuff right. There's a button in there called Check Accessibility. Mash that button, go through the accessibility checker that it pops up, read through all of the very helpful text, understand why it's complaining about these things, because it'll tell you, and this is all stuff that everyone in your workplace is likely to be able to do. Very simple, very easy to follow, and by the time they get to the end of it, there's probably a few quality assurance checks that you still want your publishing team to do to make sure that they haven't just shortcutted a whole bunch of stuff, but you'll have a relatively accessible Word document at the end of that process. So once we've got that Word document, that's cool. We're going to now create our PDF. Now, to start with that PDF, we really need to start with an accessible source document, whether that's our Word document that we've just finished, or whether we've got our graphic designers to do a bit of training and they can produce an accessible InDesign file. They can then export out that PDF. But how do you know if that PDF that you were supplied by somebody else is actually accessible? Well, there is a format out there, a standard that you can test your PDF against called PDF UA, or PDF Universally Accessible Format. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to be able to test this one, but it's essentially a WCAG for PDFs to make sure that the technology is going to be able to read and understand that. And as long as your tagging inside of your PDF is correct, PDF UA will wrap it all up and make sure that the machine can understand it, everything can pass it, and it will be accessible. Now, Acrobat can do this. In order to be able to do it in Acrobat, you would likely want to run the more friendly accessibility checkers, but then to check the conformance against PDF UA, you actually go into the pre-flight tool, and then there's an option in there, and it's all very itty-bitty and very difficult to see up here, but there's an option in there for check against PDF UA. It'll run that test, it'll come back with a whole bunch of stuff that it's unhappy about. It will help you fix a lot of those problems as well. If you find problems that it can't fix, there's actually a little wrench icon there, and as usable as this interface is, that little wrench is a really helpful little tool to fix a lot of the other problems that it will identify. Once you've gone through all that whole process, you can actually sign your document, you'll have a PDF UA, and it'll all be good. There is another tool out there called Pack. Pack is so much friendlier and easier, but it is Windows only, and it can't fix anything, but it can test it. And that's where this one is a particularly helpful tool, just to distribute across your organisation to make sure that people are accepting documents from outside that are actually good to publish. So the Pack tool, you drop it in there, it's a very good linter, it's a very mean linter, it will definitely say everything is wrong, but one of its nicest features is the ability to visually see your PDF as its tagged structure. So in this particular diagram, you can see that we've got the figure, the alt text, the H1s, the H2, more pictures with their alt text, and you can just scan through your entire document and make sure that it is how it should be. All right. So we've got our Word document, we've got our PDF. Let's just have a quick look at Easy Read. Now, we've touched on the benefits of Easy Read already, and some brands call it Easy English. Easy Read, Easy English, quite often the exact same thing, just with different flavours. It's like Pepsi and Coke. But one of the biggest drawbacks is that there are no standards to be held accountable to. There's a whole bunch of best practice, but there's no real standards to really hook into. From our research, this is by far the most valuable extra document that you could add to anything. So not just people with disability, but people with cognitive impairments, but people who just perhaps have a touch of ADHD or just prefer to be able to read this summarised version of a document. They're out there and there's lots of them and they love these documents. So if there was one thing that I could pass on, it's definitely try and get yourself an easy read version of your documents. Now, to produce one of these, ideally, we get an expert to come and help you do it because they've got some experience with it. They've got the ability to test your document and test the images and test the text that you've come through with and make sure that this is going to be effective for the audience that you want it to hit. But at the same time, there are no standards. If you're following all of the basics and you're testing it yourself, I don't see that there's any reason why people should feel scared to go ahead and just start creating your own easy read documents and testing them with your users and getting them out there because they're very, very valuable. I'm sure all of you have seen this, but this is what an easy read version of a document looks like. Lots of pictures, very simple sentences, easy to work your way through. All right, so we've got that. We've ticked off a lot of these boxes. A lot of the things like high contrast and dark mode and things, they're all fine now. The browser, the person's own device is able to adjust one of the versions that we've given them. They should be fine. Digital Braille, as it turns out, told by someone who uses a digital Braille machine that don't provide me a digital Braille file because it is pretty much identical to a screen reader. It will read the content out of anything else that you've produced that is accessible just as well as if you fed it an individual file. So don't go out and invest in creating separate digital Braille files of your documents. And then the Auslan version. So one of the things that we definitely took out of this as a team is that Auslan is not limited to deaf users. There are a number of users out there who reported appreciating the inclusion of an Auslan interpreter for interpretation of documents. So while many deaf people have Auslan as their first language and English may not be their strongest language, providing an Auslan version ensured that they received the information in a way that was clear and natural for them. It can also be really beneficial if we have something with a very complex subject to have somebody explain it using Auslan. So similar to our easy read thing, it takes that very complex thing, breaks it down into very simple terms so that you can get it across very quickly and effectively. And then finally, translations. The bots are getting better. You could rely on AI or bots or something like that to create your translations, but there's still an element of risk in there if you did allow the robots to take over. First Nations languages are also going to be pretty problematic with AI just because they don't have as much material to train on. You're probably still going to want to go out and invest in some professional translations for those ones. But in all cases, it comes down to your business. What is your business comfortable with in terms of a degree of risk of how quickly and easily can we convert this across and get it out there versus how much do we need to rely on it? How trustworthy does it need to be? Do we need to invest in getting that translated across? And so there we go. By taking a moment there at the beginning and getting that Word document at the very beginning of the process at a point that it made a heck of a lot of sense, it was very, very simple. We could then take that very simple Word document and convert it into whatever we needed it to be. So we're going to take this guy and we're going to make him a PDF. Or we're going to... But not that one. That one wasn't PDF UA compliant. You didn't think I was prepared for that. And so we'll take our Word document and we're going to convert it into all of those different versions that we needed. And now, oh, look at our dog. It's all done. It's in whatever format you needed, and everybody can appreciate and access it. It's even standing up. All right. Now, look, we are actually out of time, but I will very, very quickly blast through a vision of how we think this could work in future. So we take that Word document. We create a PDF just to make sure that we've got both of those covered. We feed our Word document through a tool called Mammoth.js. Mammoth.js will take your Word document and the styles that you've set there and spit out HTML exactly as you want it. So if you have something that's like, here's a box that we want to be able to style, but you know you're in the final markup, you want that to be div class thing with a span inside and a couple of images, you just set the style, Mammoth will take that, identify it, spit it out as the exact HTML that you wanted. Very high potential for doing some really effective things very quickly. The audio version can come from that HTML version. We use our AI, it does all of our translations, it does the easy read, it can pump that all out. You just need someone to validate that what you've created is good, is making sense, and of course test it with your users still. We've cut out a whole bunch of that work in the middle to get that work done in the first instance. And then the Auslan version can kick in there as well, based off the easy read to make sure that everything's good. And I do have this very last video which just blew my mind when I saw it, because the idea of generating, oh, where's my mouse? There it is. An Auslan interpretation of something on the fly and dynamically, just have a look at this.
Attention customers, the evacuation signal has sounded. Please make your way to the nearest exit.
And with that, it is exit time. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. I think we are out of time for questions, but if anyone had any, you could come and see me afterwards. Oh, just a quick one? Yeah.
Do you have any experience with like scanned documents? Like when the official document is something that someone important signed?
Yeah. Scanned documents can be tricky. So the question was, how do we handle scanned documents when there's a signature or something of relevance on that? The approach that we've taken is to have two versions, unfortunately. So one that is the scanned version with the signature on it, another version that is the content of that without the signatures themselves. That way you have the official version and you have an accessible option. So that seems to be working for us. All right. Oh, yes, up the back.
Fantastic, congratulations, that's incredible effort. I'm wondering if it's a percentage of effort for the whole project, including engagement, design, development. How big do you think that content creation, testing, validation was?
So the question was, how much of a percentage of the whole project was the testing of the documents in particular? And creation of the documents. So how much of a percentage was the creation of all of those documents and everything else? What I will say is that what we've done is established the capability for us to create those documents. We had over 2,000 documents. We purged 1,200 of them or so. We got down to about 800. This was a 10-year-old website. There's a lot of junk on there. And so the work to now make this all work the way we've designed it is still to come. There's also things that, with those examples that I showed you, I already know that we've fallen short on some of those ones. But we have the plan and we know how we're going to do it. And this is how we're going to try and approach that over time. And yeah, last one.
I think the gentleman's name was Jamal. His experience where, like, what the guidelines had said and what his lived experience was didn't align. Was that an edge case? Was that something that you came across fairly often? I'm just curious to understand how often that happened.
Yeah. So the question there was, with Jamal's example of being frustrated with the way that we'd followed the WCAG standards, and whether that was something that we came across more often. The answer is no. I think the WCAG standards, in the most part, are pretty solid. They don't get in the way. And even all of the documents that we've referenced in this particular thing still say that we need to be meeting those minimum standards of WCAG to get that technical side of things done, so that we can then evolve and get the usable side of things polished up and on top. So no, there's not a lot of that, but that was one of those examples that just really popped out and made us go, huh, usable is different. Yeah. Very quick one.
Yeah, how psychotic did you get trying to hit AAA? Because that's a AAA standard.
That one is a AAA standard, and we did not go psychotic trying to make all our websites meet AAA. It was more that that is one of those AAA rules that is an easy one to hit, so we might as well hit it. So that was why that AAA rule was implemented on that website. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. We'll catch you all later.